Somewhere over the Persian Gulf, the situation just changed. Iran released footage. A United States airbase in Kuwait struck. The images are unmistakable. And across the Atlantic, in Washington, the man who started all of this has gone completely silent. No posts, no statements, no press conferences, just a photograph of a reflecting pool. This is not a pause. This is not restraint. Something is shifting beneath the surface of this war, and the silence from the White House may be telling us more than any statement ever could. To understand where we are, you have to understand how we got here. The United States and Israel launched strikes near Bandar Abbas Airport, positioned along the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. Roughly a third of the world's seaborne oil passes through that narrow corridor. When that strait closes, the global economy feels it within days. Iran's response came fast. Retaliatory strikes hit a U.S. airbase in Kuwait. And now both sides are accusing the other of violating a ceasefire that, by every available measure, does not actually exist in any meaningful form. Call it what it is. This is an active war. The ceasefire is a label on a fire that refuses to go out. But here is where the story gets more complicated, more layered, and in some ways more alarming than the missile footage itself. While the White House went dark, other global actors moved into that silence like they had been waiting for it. Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader, issued a declaration. There will be no denuclearization. Not now, not ever. North Korea will remain a nuclear power permanently, and Pyongyang continued to publicly celebrate its nuclear enrichment program, a program that critics note was allowed to advance during a previous period when American diplomatic energy was spent exchanging what were described as personal letters between the two leaders rather than extracting verifiable commitments. The strategic consequences of that period are now being restated openly by North Korea itself on the record. One nuclear standoff rages in the Middle East. Another quietly hardens in East Asia. And the President of the United States has not said a word. Then, in that silence, a story breaks. It moves through Axios' source to two senior U.S. officials and a regional mediator. The headline: the United States and Iran have reached a memorandum of understanding, a framework agreement, a 60-day ceasefire extension, paired with the launch of negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. The story spread fast. Markets responded. Commentators declared victory, but read it carefully, and the picture changes. This is not a deal. It is an agreement to consider the terms under which a deal might eventually be negotiated. The nuclear question is deferred for 60 days. The Strait of Hormuz, which was open before this war began, would be reopened as part of the arrangement, and President Trump, according to the report itself, has not given final approval. He reportedly conveyed through intermediaries that he wants a few days to think about it. A deal that requires days of thinking is not a deal. It is a posture. And the timing of its release on the same morning that key U.S. inflation data came in at its worst level in years is a detail worth sitting with. The economic picture that emerged Thursday morning is stark. The PCE inflation index, the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of price growth, rose to 3.8% in April 2026, the highest reading since May 2023. Core PCE, which strips out food and energy, climbed to 3.3%, nearly double the Fed's target. These are not minor statistical fluctuations. This is the Fed's dashboard telling policymakers that the inflation fight is not over. It may be getting worse. Underneath those headline numbers, the situation is more troubling still. The personal savings rate fell to 2.6%, the lowest since June 2022, down sharply from 5.5% just 1 year prior. American households are spending down savings to cover everyday costs. 50% of the items tracked in the inflation data are growing at 3% or higher annually. As one economist noted, this is not just an energy price shock. The inflation problem is broad, it is structural, it is spreading. And on the morning those numbers published, a report about a possible peace framework dominated the conversation instead. That is not coincidence. That is the mechanics of distraction operating in real time, back to the so-called deal, because the story did not hold together for long. Israeli officials, briefing their own media, pushed back directly. According to an Israeli official, Iran's supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei has not approved the proposed agreement. Trump, according to the same briefing, has not approved it either. The Israeli side noted that Iranian officials who may have engaged with the framework do not hold final authority, that power rests with the supreme leader. Israel said it had not been informed that either side had actually signed off, and that disputes remain unresolved. Israel's Channel 14 confirmed the same picture. As of their last update, neither Trump nor Khamenei had approved anything. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu appeared publicly to announce that Israel now controls approximately 60% of the Gaza Strip, with a stated directive to reach 70% at a conference. In the Jordan Valley, voices in the crowd reportedly called for 100%. Regarding Lebanon, Netanyahu said strikes would continue and described the conflict as having no end unless the other side surrenders. Iran, for its part, has made its position clear. Any deal must include permanent security guarantees not just for Iran, but for Lebanon as well. And while those demands sat on the table, Israeli strikes on Beirut continued, with reports of entire city blocks destroyed and communities demolished. This is not an environment where a peace framework survives the weekend uncontested. Iran's supreme leader also issued a statement Thursday. The language was measured but pointed. He described what he characterized as an enemy strategy. Not just military pressure, but economic coercion and a propaganda siege designed to create internal division and social fragmentation to achieve through information warfare and financial strangulation what could not be achieved on the battlefield. Whether that framing is accurate or self-serving, it tells you something important about how Tehran reads this moment. Iran does not believe it is negotiating with a good faith partner, and the pattern of the past year gives them reasons for that conclusion. Major escalations have come, according to this account, precisely when negotiations appeared to be approaching a framework when trust was at its most exposed. That is a deeply destabilizing dynamic. If the party you are negotiating with has a history of striking when talks create vulnerability, rational actors stop making themselves vulnerable in talks. Away from the Middle East, the Trump administration's strategic footprint in the Western Hemisphere continued to expand Thursday. Reports emerged that Guatemala, under significant U.S. pressure, secretly agreed to allow joint American military strikes inside its own borders against groups the administration designates as drug traffickers. This follows a similar arrangement in Ecuador, where U.S. troops have been actively engaged in combat operations. Fishing vessels off the Venezuelan coast have reportedly been destroyed by U.S. military action. Approximately 200 people have been killed in these operations without any judicial process, with footage of some actions being released publicly by U.S. military commands. The New York Times reported that the broader architecture here points toward a strategy of encircling Mexico with U.S. military presence across neighboring countries, normalizing American troop deployments throughout Latin America as a step toward pressuring Mexico itself into accepting a large-scale U.S. military presence within its borders. The implications of that strategy, legal, diplomatic, and human, are significant and largely undiscussed in the noise of the Middle East crisis. Inside Washington, separate reporting added texture to the domestic picture. The Washington Post reported that Trump administration appointees pressured the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to design a $250 bill featuring the president's portrait and signature. Federal law currently prohibits living individuals from appearing on U.S. currency. A new denomination would require congressional approval. The bureau director, who declined to move forward with the project, was reportedly reassigned. A $250 denomination, for context, does not currently exist in American currency. ProPublica published a separate investigation finding that a senior White House aide intervened to secure a $620 million Pentagon loan for a company connected to Donald Trump. JRB, a small North Carolina startup whose valuation, critics note, bore little relationship to the size of the federal commitment it received. The New York Times reported that at least $60 million in national park entry fees paid by American visitors has been redirected toward renovations in Washington, D.C., including projects tied to the president's aesthetic vision for the Capitol. These stories did not lead. They ran alongside war coverage and inflation data, processed as background noise in a media environment saturated with crisis. And that saturation may itself be the point. When you map the information environment of the past 24 hours, the leaked peace framework, the war footage, the economic data, the Latin America escalations, the corruption reporting, what emerges is not chaos. It is a specific kind of volume, too much to track, too much to process, enough noise that the signal is very hard to find. The signal, stripped of the noise, is this. A war is active and expanding. A ceasefire exists mostly as a word. An economy is deteriorating in ways that will directly affect millions of households. And the political architecture meant to provide oversight or accountability appears either captured or overwhelmed. Where does this end? That is genuinely unclear. Iran's supreme leader has not approved the framework. Trump has not approved it. Israel is striking Lebanon and expanding in Gaza. North Korea has formally closed the door on denuclearization. American military operations are active across multiple countries in the Western Hemisphere. Inflation is rising. Savings are falling. The reflecting pool in the photograph Trump posted is still and quiet. The rest of the world is anything but. Whatever comes next, whether a deal emerges, collapses, or was never real to begin with, one thing seems certain. We are not at the end of this story. We may not even be at the middle.